Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, beautiful HSP listeners, and welcome to episode 215. I hope this episode finds you as well as can possibly be in this moment, and you're getting a little bit of sunshine to bask in, or love to take in from the beings around you. Today we're going to talk about something I have never actually talked about on this podcast before, and that's the missing piece to true relationship transformation. I have talked about some of it, of course, but never this whole thing in this particular way. So if you think that you know what it is based on what I've said here in the past, you're probably not quite correct. So tune in to hear all about it now and leave with more clarity on how to begin shifting things in your relationship in a way that truly lasts. Because if I know you, you really want and value a really loving, healthy, fulfilling, intimate relationship. That's why you're here. That's why you listen to my podcasts. And you've tried things to make your relationship really good. And you may have found that some of what you've tried has helped, but perhaps it didn't fully change things in the way that you want. And you and your relationship still aren't where you really want them to be. Now, some of this is because so much of what is taught, like what counselors and therapists and relationship advice out there focuses on when it comes to relationships, is the outer dynamic of the relationship, how you interact with your partner, how they interact with you. But as I hope I've conveyed really clearly over, this entire podcast really, but especially lately in my most recent episodes, the real work, the real truth is that this work must start inside yourself. Of course, I've talked about that from the very beginning of the podcast, but if you haven't listened to the episode about emotional agency recently, that was a couple episodes ago, that is a must-listen episode. So definitely listen to that one. But I've always taught this, so I'm not going to reiterate too much here other than to say your inner world, your inner emotional world is the foundation on which your intimate relationship, your marriage rests. So how your relationship feels is hugely determined by how well, how healthy, how resilient your inner world is and how much agency you have over it. So this isn't a new point here, but it's such an important point. And by the way, this understanding is exactly why I recently rebuilt my core program, Foundations of Emotional Well-Being, around what I've come to believe are the 3 essential layers of lasting change for highly sensitive women. So we're not going to get into all of that at this moment. That's actually what today's episode is about. But if you've been wondering why I've been talking so much lately about emotional agency and self-worth and the nervous system, this is where it really all comes together. So I want to make it so clear that if you've tried to implement relationship advice or teachings from therapists or books, etc., and it didn't help much or really at all, or it helped some but not enough, or if it even made things worse, and I've definitely heard that from plenty of clients, this isn't because you failed. It's most likely that the teachings and the approach failed you. And sometimes it's that you didn't get the support to be able to actually implement the teachings as well. So let's just take a quick look at how traditional relationship advice focuses mostly on the outer relationship. And by the way, this is not what I focus on if you haven't picked that up yet. One more time, I deeply focus on the inner relationship with yourself and with your spouse. And that directly informs the outer relationship in the deepest, best way possible. But most advice out there focuses mostly on that outer relationship. And that message is basically, if you could just do the right things with your partner, the relationship would improve. Or, of course, if they could just do the right things with you, the relationship would improve. And examples of the quote-unquote right thing that you should do with your partner oftentimes are like communication skills or conflict resolution or active listening, date nights, quality time together, love languages, right? Learning each other's love languages and acting from that place, setting boundaries, making requests, meeting your partner's needs, other intimacy strategies, and relationship habits and routines. Now, I would call these things more like the outer aspects of relationships. And of course, none of these are bad things to work on. In fact, many are genuinely important and helpful. And of course, I also teach versions of these in my one-to-one marriage coaching program, Sanctuary. So I do believe in these, of course. The problem is that they often don't address what's happening inside the person bringing those skills into the relationship. Especially as a highly sensitive person, you can learn, say, perfect communication skills and intimacy strategies and go on date nights and still feel unloved, still take things personally, still feel really anxious, still become really reactive, still struggle with resentment, still doubt yourself, still get really aggravated by your partner. And that's because the deeper system driving those experiences hasn't changed despite doing these different things on the surface. And this is because those outer approaches are not complete. They're like just the bark of the tree, for example. You would never say the bark is the tree. The real life of the tree comes from within it, right? So I've talked at length about how so often relationship advice and therapy focuses on the wrong things. And a great episode to listen to learn more about this is episode 137. I called that one Discouraged in Love, 3 Toxic Marriage Myths Causing It. So have a listen to that if this interests you, this topic of how so much relationship advice actually does us wrong. But again, your real focus always needs to be on your own inner world, your emotional world healing first, if you want real lasting change outside in the relationship. So that's where things so often go wrong with relationship improvement approaches. But even when you really do see, and this is important, even when you see, okay, the problem isn't just my spouse or the ways we interact on the surface, I need to work on myself. I see that. I get that. Even when you get that and you actually start focusing on your inner emotional patterns and healing them, which, by the way, congratulations, that is amazing. And just getting to that point really puts you ahead of so many who are trying to improve their relationships. But so often, those approaches to healing that inner world and those emotional patterns don't really work well by themselves either. Because again, they are incomplete. So, for example, some popular focuses on this inner world of yours tend to be focusing, for example, entirely on mindset. And that might look like positive thinking, affirmations, thought work, reframing beliefs, mindset coaching, changing stories, and inner narratives. And of course, some of this can be so helpful, but some can not be, can in fact be damaging if you don't understand important nuances and if this kind of thought work is done in a vacuum. So for example, if the nervous system is dysregulated, the body will often override the new stories, the new thoughts, and you can end up essentially trying to gaslight yourself without realizing it. Another popular focus of internal emotional work is just entirely on emotions, meaning like feeling your feelings, processing emotions, somatic work, trauma release, and inner child work. Now, again, these things are beautiful and they're helpful. And when you focus on only that, you may never learn how to guide your thinking or intentionally cultivate healthier beliefs or even root out old ones. And I'll talk more about why that's problematic in a minute. Other internal healing approaches focus almost entirely on nervous system regulation. And you may have tried that yourself by doing, say, breath work or vagus nerve work or meditation or just grounding techniques or calming techniques. And again, these can be very helpful. But again, there are ways to do this nervous system regulation work that actually aren't really healing the nervous system. They're just kind of like little hacks that work very temporarily. And on top of that, a calm nervous system can still be running old belief patterns that are really painful and that keep you trapped, such as I'm not enough, I'm unlovable, I'm too sensitive, and so many more. And still other internal healing approaches focus almost entirely on self-esteem or self-love, like self-worth work, self-compassion, confidence building. And again, these are great oftentimes, depending how they're done. Again, they can be done in a way that isn't sustainable and that actually backfires. But again, if they're done in a vacuum, if they're done without other supports and other internal work, like if you don't understand your thoughts or your nervous system patterns, you're going to struggle to sustain any changes in that realm of self-worth. Another big sort of popular area of focusing on the inner world is focusing on attachment patterns, attachment wounds. So, for example, attachment theory, anxious attachment styles, childhood wounds. Again, this stuff can be really helpful, but understanding why you do something is not the same as changing that at a deep level. It's not what actually helps you rebuild healthy attachment styles. So my point here is really, if you've done one or two of these things, or even three of these things, and they've helped a little, but not as well as you are led to believe, or it hasn't really shifted much in your marriage, or you still feel stuck in whatever issues keep coming up in your marriage, this is because even most of these focus on your inner world approaches are incomplete, because they are working with just one layer of your inner world at a time. It's like using one color to draw a picture instead of using the 10 beautiful colors that would make it more rich and alive and real. So in the recent emotional agency episode, that's episode 213, I believe, I taught you about the 3 layers that are essential to learn to work with. And that is, again, the mindset or the thought layer, the somatic or body or nervous system layer. Those words are just kind of interchangeable at the moment. And your self-worth or heart layer. But most approaches out there, again, just focus on one of these, if any. And even I, in the past, have just taught these separately, emphasizing just one of these at a time in some of my smaller courses. So at first, I really emphasized the thought layer. I taught mostly that on the podcast, if you remember, or if you've listened to some of the earlier episodes. And that is a hugely important layer. And by itself, it's not the full picture. And I also somewhat recently made a podcast episode about how the nervous system has been the missing piece for HSPs in inner healing, but really especially in healing and making marriages much better. And this is actually very true. The nervous system work is the first essential layer that makes the rest of the changes possible for HSPs in their marriages, but it's not the complete foundation for lasting emotional safety and relational change for highly sensitive people. By itself, it's not enough. It's not the full picture. I've also talked here on the podcast a lot about how self-worth, self-compassion, and loving yourself are key to your emotional well-being and to your relationships well-being. And this is also so true. But any one of these 3 without the other is not enough on its own. It's incomplete. They need each other to round out and truly make the lasting change you want. So a couple of my other wonky metaphors to help you understand this. It's like if you have a bad cold and you're trying to get better by just drinking extra fluids, meanwhile, not slowing down at all from your 80-hour work week and eating tons of fried food and cheese and sugar. Like, that's not going to heal you. Or you just take extra naps, but you hardly drink any water at all, or take any vitamin D or C and you neglect your diet, right? Like, again, your body's going to have a lot harder time recovering from just that one intervention. Or a metaphor that I maybe like better is, it's like if you were trying to create a beautiful garden full of lovely plants and yummy veggies, and you prepped the soil. You did a nice job really making that soil rich and nutrient dense, but you placed the garden in a very shady area under a black walnut tree. And if you don't know about that, many plants won't grow near or around walnut trees. Or another garden example is like if you put the garden in a really sunny spot, but it's more like a desert with hardly any rain, and you didn't make sure the soil was anything more than sand. So a garden needs more than one aspect of the environment and the inputs into it to be healthy, to be right. And it's the same thing with your inner emotional system. Your emotional and relational experience is hugely influenced, not by one aspect of your inner world, but by how the system of that inner world is functioning as a unit, how all three layers are working together. Your nervous system, your body, your thoughts, i.e. your mind, and your sense of self-worth, i.e. your heart. So again, those are the three layers. So these three layers, when worked with in the ways that I teach, actually address all the other pieces I mentioned before. They are the layers you need to work with to process emotions and heal attachment wounds too. They really encompass all of that inner work that I mentioned earlier. Now, I want to pause my thought thread here for a second and to just tell you now that if you want to learn a bit more than what I'm sharing today on each of these individual layers, like if you want to learn about each layer sort of individually, I'm going to take a moment now to share an episode that you can head to next after this one for each of these three layers. I actually have so many episodes in this podcast that I can point you to for each because I've been talking about this in different ways for years, but I'm going to keep it simple and just give you one now for each layer. So for the nervous system layer, check out episode 206. That's called Why Traditional Marriage Advice Often Fails Highly Sensitive People. This was the one I just mentioned a few minutes ago where I talk about this as the big key for so many HSPs. And again, that's true. The nervous system is that for so many HSPs, but it's just one of the three key aspects for HSPs, which that brings me to the next layer, which is your mind. And the episode I'm going to point you to for that area is episode 120. That episode's called How to Work with Your Two Brains for More Love Revisited. And for the self-worth area, go check out episode 35. I talked about it way towards the beginning of this podcast. That one's called Self-Worth in Love. So feel free to dig into those after you listen to this full episode. But now I just want to make sure that you hear this really clearly. If you only work on one or even two of these areas, the others will quietly but steadily pull you back. So let's look at this a little bit more. What I've come to see is that if you have a regulated nervous system, which by the way, most of us don't at this moment in time, especially as HSPs, if you haven't done a lot of work on this, but if you have a regulated nervous system, but you have an unguided mind, i.e. you don't know how to work with the layer of your mind in a conscious way, you're still going to feel emotionally volatile and have trouble staying regulated. Or you'll be ping-ponging emotionally. You'll get calm and regulated and then suddenly sent into emotional spikes. And then you'll do your regulation work, which will feel kind of harder. And again, something will send you into another emotional spiral. It'll really be this fight, sort of this back and forth. And you really won't feel steady. And you'll feel like you're always working against something. Something's always pulling you out of that regulation you've worked hard to get to. On the other hand, if you're regulated and you have low self-worth, it's going to be a similar thing. You're still going to get triggered super easily. You'll be constantly needing to re-regulate out of hurt. And you're still going to be looking primarily outside of yourself for validation. And it'll just be a struggle. And in your relationship, your partner's probably going to feel the burden of that because you're looking to him for so much of your value. And again, on the other hand, if you do know mindset work, thought work, but you have a dysregulated body, the unfortunate truth is you won't be able to apply that thought work when you most need it. And again, it will be a fight. Your nervous system will always be working against your thinking mind. And so it will be a total uphill battle, and you'll always be trying to use your mind to settle something in your body that can actually only be truly settled somatically. So it's not going to stick. So that's just a taste of how it doesn't work to focus on just one area, because your inner emotional system is a deeply integrated living system that must all be supported and healthy and work well together. And that system is what I've long called your mind, body, heart system. So your nervous system layer is really about feeling safe at a deep bone, soul, deep level. And your mind layer is about what you believe and the stories you're telling yourself, the way that you see the world, and therefore what you feel and experience in the world. And your heart layer is about your sense of worth, your lovability, and your sense of belonging, and almost your identity. And super importantly, these layers, again, are not separate. They're constantly talking to each other. They're constantly affecting each other. Like what you believe affects how safe you feel. How safe you feel affects what thoughts your mind generates. And both of these influence whether you experience yourself as worthy, lovable, and enough. And when you experience yourself as worthy and lovable, your nervous system feels more bone deep safety. And how you think and therefore how you feel about things happening in your relationship feel more loving, more safe, more full-hearted. So it's one integrated system, one giant feedback loop that builds on each other. So every moment of every day, all three of these layers are influencing each other. And by the way, I did want to mention that when you work on these three layers together, you're also doing a huge amount of what many people call attachment healing. Attachment wounds don't heal through insight alone. They heal as safety, thought patterns, and self-worth really begin changing together. And so this work is really a powerful way to heal attachment wounds and patterns. And I just love seeing my clients heal from those long-held wounds that were driving so much pain for so long. And as you do this inner work on these three layers in yourself, everything in your emotional and relational life begin to work much better. I mean, imagine what your marriage would feel like if you felt more emotionally secure, like deeply so. And you weren't constantly second guessing whether you were loved enough, and you could actually receive and feel the love that's already there. And conflict didn't throw you into a spiral, and it became much easier to navigate. And you stopped getting pulled into the same painful patterns over and over again. And you felt calmer and more confident and really just more like yourself, like who you are deep down. And you trusted yourself and your perceptions more. And you felt more connected to your spouse and more hopeful about your relationship. And these changes didn't happen for just a week or two. They actually lasted. That's what actually becomes possible when these three layers begin working together. So my answer to the question, what's the missing piece, is there isn't one piece that's missing. The missing piece is understanding that your emotional well-being is a system made up of these three layers. And if you don't work with all three in the ways that truly support all three, change just won't hold. So in my one-to-one work with clients, I've always done all three layers, worked with all three layers in a seamlessly integrated way. I just haven't brought it all together as clearly and as deeply in my smaller programs. I too was offering pieces of these three layers in my smaller programs, and that's one reason I'm no longer offering those littler courses anymore. But now things have changed. Now I am making sure that all three layers are deeply addressed in my core program. Because I eventually saw clearly that the women that I worked with, whose marriages really changed in the ways they really wanted, we weren't just working on communication or anything on the outer level. I mean, we were doing that as well, but we weren't just working on that, and we weren't just working on mindset, and they weren't just doing their nervous system work or self-worth work. The women whose changes actually held, we were strengthening all three layers of their inner world at the same time. And that was essential and made the outer work between her and her spouse way more possible and so much more effective. So if you're listening and you're thinking, this is the first thing that's actually explained why nothing else fully worked, that's exactly why I wanted to record this episode. And it's also why I created Foundations of Emotional Wellbeing for HSPs the way I did. Because for highly sensitive people, this work has to happen at the level it actually lives. In your nervous system, in your mind, and in your sense of self-worth. Because when these three layers begin strengthening together, you stop feeling like you're constantly fighting yourself. You stop spending so much energy just trying to feel okay. And you stop getting pulled into emotional spirals every time something difficult happens in your relationship. When you begin strengthening your nervous system, guiding your mind, and building a deeper sense of worth all together, all at once, the changes don't just help momentarily. They hold, they last, and they create the foundation for a much healthier, happier relationship, starting with the relationship you have with yourself. So I've said a lot today, and I just want to summarize in a sort of succinct way to make it super clear. So Most relationship advice focuses on the relationship, like the outer parts of the relationship. And that's the wrong place to focus at first. Later, once you've done the deeper self-work, this can be important to focus on. But better advice starts with you focusing on you, your inner world. But even then, many approaches focus only on one part of that inner world, that emotional world. So the missing piece there is learning to work with your whole internal system, your nervous system, your mind, your thoughts, and your sense of self-worth. Because those pieces, those layers are constantly interacting with each other and creating an emotional system that drives everything about how you experience your relationship. Altogether, these three pieces make up your emotional system. And when all of them begin working together, that's when emotional well-being starts to feel natural instead of like something you're constantly trying to achieve and striving towards and struggling with. So once you learn to work on these three layers together as a system, you actually become the guide of your emotional world. You are the agent of your emotions, which is the absolute essential foundation of relational agency and having the marriage you want. So please understand that if you felt discouraged or frustrated or like you've worked hard and you still aren't where you want to be in your relationship, it doesn't mean you were doing it wrong. It doesn't mean you're incapable of change. More likely, you are simply missing some essential pieces of the essential foundation. And the good news is that that doesn't have to be true anymore. You can begin building that foundation today. And as your nervous system, your mind, and your sense of self-worth begin healing together and shifting together, you're going to start experiencing the kind of shifts that don't just feel good in the moment, but that actually hold. They become part of who you are. And once that foundation is there, deeper relationship work becomes not only possible, but so much easier and really changes the relationship so much faster because you're no longer trying to create a healthy relationship from an unhealthy relationship with yourself. You're building it from the inside out. And that's exactly why Foundations of Emotional Well-Being for HSPs comes first in my work. It's the first core program you start with. And then for those of you who do want to go further, that's where Sanctuary 1-to-1 comes in. It helps you bring that stronger, healthier version of yourself into the deeper relational work between you and your spouse that really creates the connected, loving partnership you truly want. So to learn more and get started in Foundations of Emotional Well-Being, or as I fondly call it, FEW, HSP, head to hspmarriagecoaching.com/foundations of emotional well-being. Each of those last words after the slash have a little dash in between them. It may be easier to just go to the direct link, which I'm going to post in the show notes, or you can head to my website, www.hspmarriagecoaching.com, and you'll see on the menu a button that says Start Here, Foundation. So click that one. It is in this program where the work for HSPs that truly transform their relationships begins. Really studying yourself inside so connection can thrive outside. And I'd love to support you in this program and inside yourself. All right, my friends, be oh so well.